Today, we will be discussing about a quantitative approach towards environmental sociology as a part of its brief introduction. The objectives for today's study will be understanding the socio-ecological systems and its implications in empirical research, different elements of research designs, and finally we will understand how to analyze these collected data sets. First, we will understand about the Anthropocene, or the challenging of understanding the world in a new ways. The period since the Second World War was marked as a rapid accelerating changes with many aspects to human society and environment, which in simpler terms means that during this era of Second World War there was a lot of changes in the human society, and these changes in the global world actually had potential consequences which were key for various environmental factors. These environmental changes in turn contributed increasingly to frequent and severe drought, flood, famine, incidences of pandemic as for example the SARS-CoV-2 and similar other instances which led to massive societal disruption, hardships, especially among the poorer section of the society. This Anthropocene or this concept of Anthropocene brings out another important system which is known as the SES or the Social-ecological system. This social-ecological system is an emerging concept which understands that the nature and human societies are intertwined with each other, they are interconnected and interdependent to each other. This concept was developed in mid-early 1990s through a collaboration of scholars coming from various fields like ecology, economics and also sociology, as well as some common pooled worked resource system. This concept of SES is based on the notion that is the portrayal between social and natural system is artificial and arbitrary, emphasizing that people and nature are intertwined. Therefore, we can say in simpler terms that socio-ecological systems are not just social plus ecological system, rather it's a cohesive integrated system having strong connections, and it is a feedback within the society and ecological systems that works in a cyclical manner, giving some overall dynamics, imparting the dynamics to each other. So, in other terms, we can say that this social ecological system or ACS is a type of complex adaptive system. So, what is a complex adaptive system? These systems have many interdependent parts that interact in ways that give rise to an emergent system-wide pattern that cannot be predicted from specific properties of individual components of the system. Furthermore, we can also say that the system-wide patterns in turn influence the behavior of some individual system patterns. There are 6 organizing principles of a complex adaptive system that helps us in further understanding the information of an ACS. The first of such system is that ACS are constituted relationally, which means the relation and interaction between the components or the individual components is more important than the properties of individual components themselves. That is, a system, an ACS system, the components, everything works in a synchronized fashion, and the single components of the properties doesn't work singularly in these kind of patterns. Second is that they have adaptive capabilities, as it has been already mentioned number of times that there are many interrelation systems that creates this feedback process that enables ACS to continuously adjust and adapt to its changing surroundings. Third is that SES structures are always dynamic in nature, but these dynamic relationships are never nonlinear, meaning that even a small change in any of the single components of ACS system can lead to a drastic effect. Fourth feature is that ACS do not have any clear boundaries. Due to extensive interaction between the surrounding borderline components and the components of ACS, a proper clear boundary of ACS system cannot be defined. The fifth point is that ACS is always context dependent, and the sixth point is that ACS is always characterized by its casuality and emergence. Now, when we implicate these SES structures in research, we find that these complex adaptive systems have profoundly shaped the development of SES throughout the ages, and now it has been drastically used in research purposes. Since the concept of SES was translated into framework for researching, people have worked over this, and over 13,000 papers in this field has been published. Socio-ecological system research now recognizes and represents an interdisciplinary area of sustainability science. So, what is this social ESS research? Before understanding that, we need to understand the concept of empirical ESS. The conduct of empirical environmental social science is a type of social science that is closely related to socio-ecological systems and socio-ecological research. Here, ESS or empirical environmental social sciences have two major aims. One is to study the systematic norms, preferences, relations, regulations, institutes together with how humans value the non-human world. And secondly, it is to identify and evaluate ways of altering human behavior in light of one or more definitions or having some other desirable or necessary ends. As a part of this second aim, many environmentalists now work with those affecting or affected by the environmental changes rather than just conducting researches on them. Now coming to the various elements of a research project. Various elements of research projects can be actually catered, but however, when you are designing a particular research project, four areas needs to have primary importance. These are the research design, the sampling methodologies used to target observations, the measurement protocols used to collect data on particular set of chosen observations, and the fourth one is the analytical techniques applied to these collected data sets. Now coming to a research design. By definition, research design is just that a design that a researcher employs to address the research question that has been proposed. Going by the taxonomy of research designs or the study types, there are major three types of designs that is catered. One is the experiment. Experiment can be of two types. It can be true experiment or quasi-experiment. It can be, the second point is the observational study. Observational study can be natural experiment, correlational study, or it can be a case study. The third point is the synthetic study. In synthetic study, it includes literature review, it includes case study based meta-analysis, and third is the systemic review. There's another type of study which is known as the embedded case study, which is actually a mix of these different aspects. Now going into the definition of an experiment. By definition, experiment is the ability to isolate the effects of one or very few factors by controlling the variation of other variables across what the term has been given as a treated and a controlled group. The majority of analysis, however, we need to know that in ESS, majority of the analysis are non-experimental. Those that are experimental that tend to occur in a lab or a small field setting because large-scale experiments are usually non-tenable due to account or resource limitations or due to some kind of political infeasibility of social changes that would be required. Such experimental ESS research is largely focused on the determinants of human behavior and cooperation because these will affect the environmental conditions. When true experiments are not feasible, researchers may turn towards quasi-experiment. So what is a quasi-experiment? Quasi-experiments are essentially experiments in which the assignments of observations to a treated or a controlled group is set in a non-random fashion. If neither true or quasi-experiments are feasible, then researchers can turn into a particular observational study. In these kind of studies, researchers do not attempt to change or manipulate the variables to test their effects. They rather simply observe or measure things in their natural or unaltered world. Natural experiments are basically a cross of being experimental and observational at the same time. A natural experiment takes the advantage of some naturally occurring treatments that is applied to one group but not to the another in a highly similar group fashion. Now, before going any further, let's take a small quiz. The full form of SES is A. Socio-ecological system, B. Socio-economical system, C. Sectional ecological system, D. Secured environmental setup. And the correct answer is option A. Socio-ecological systems. Now we will understand about the two more observational categories, that is the correlational study and case study. A correlational study involves large number of observations to warrant a statistical or qualitative comparative analysis of many observations. Correlational studies are important in ESS for their ability to facilitate cross-observations, generalizations, although most part of their unit analysis are very small. As for example, it will take small areas like a household or some generalized areas. In contrast, a case study examines one or few cases or observations of its primary unit of analysis. It involves multiple units of observations or data sources that is used to draw inferences about each cases. It involves measurement of more variables than observations, a situation that precludes the statistical analysis in favor of the qualitative analysis. Now, when qualitative and quantitative approaches are combined, the results frequently is referred to as a mixed method approach. More specifically, a correlational analysis combined with a case study creates this kind of embedded study results. An embedded study may involve in a qualitative analysis at a basic level in the case study level, but a researcher can further collect the data on enough observation and then it can be used for analysis, for statistical analysis. This can happen at a more disaggregated level. Ideally, such analysis becomes very complementary. Now, next we come to the process of sampling. Now, sampling strategy is generally a process of selecting a sample to study from a larger population for observation. We collect a sample because we do not usually have the time or the resources to collect data on an entire population of our interest. The number of observation in a sample is referred to as a sample size. We do collect an exhaustive sample. In case if we collect an exhaustive sample, it is known as census. Otherwise, if we want representative non-exhaustive samples or a small sample with attributes that reflects the overall characteristics of the larger population. If we collect a biased sample for some reason, this is known as sampling bias. This means we have somehow systematically identified or selected one type of observation to sample over the other types of observation present within the population. A biased sample is not a representation of a larger population. There are several dimensions that can distinguish different sampling strategies, and a sample can therefore be classified into a random or a non-random sample, a stratified and non-stratified samples, and stratified samples can further in turn be classified into proportional or non-proportional samples. Next comes the process of measurement. Measurement occurs in two steps. In the first step, the concept is operationalized into a variable and a certain range is assigned to that particular concept. In the second step, this variable is measured via data collection method. It can be any kind of statistical method or it can be any kind of instrument that is measuring. One necessary part of operationalization is deciding the level of measurement of a variable. There are different kind of variables which are present in this norm, which includes a qualitative variable. In case of a qualitative variable, no quantitative structure is attached to the data. Allowable texts are only values. The categorical variable divides possible values of a variable into discrete categories that cannot be meaningfully ordered, as for example, various colors. The ordinal variable divides the possible values of a variable into discrete categories that can be particularly ordered, as for example, small, large, and so on. The interval or the ratio variable can take up numerical values, the distance between which are consistently meaningful. The process of checking one measuring concept against other is known as triangulation. Now we will come to the process of interview, that is the process of procuring data from a sample set. The first set of such options involves soliciting response from human subjects regarding written or spoken questions. Informal interviews are in fact not proper interviews, but the ways most people think of the term, but are essentially informal conversations where a researcher has the human subjects during a course of, say, fieldwork season. Next comes unstructured interviews, rather informal interviews, but actually occurs as a proper interview where the subject and the researcher both knows that the interview is actually going on. Focus groups of these kind of unstructured interviews are basically small multiple settings or respondents. Semi-structured interviews involve the involvement of interview guide to make sure that certain subjects are covered and certain questions are properly asked. Finally, structured interviews are done with the help of a written questionnaire that the researcher fills out as the subject responds to the question it contains. Self-administered surveys are just like questionnaires but are filled out by subjects without the presence of a researcher. Now we will come to the analysis of this collected data. Analysis can occur majorly in a qualitative manner or a quantitative manner. Analysis is basically the process of describing and then making an inference based on the set of data that has been collected. To make an inference means to combine the data with something else, say a set of assumptions or theories or some other kind of hypothesis, and then draw a conclusion that goes beyond what the data basically presents themselves. The most basic distinction we can make between different type of analysis are the qualitative analysis and the quantitative analysis. A quantitative analysis is mostly associated with correlational studies. It involves examination of relationship between quantitative, that is categorical, ordinal or interval ratio variables, where qualitative analysis do not deal with such numerical data. A qualitative analysis is generally done in part of a case study. Instead, involves construction of inferences from the non-numerical data sources. Now it's time for another quiz. There are how many primary elements of a research project that needs to be developed and carried out to address a research questions? Option A 6, option B 8, option C 2 and option D 4. And the correct answer is option D 4. Now we will come to different type of quantitative analysis. Statistical analysis is the primary analytical tool that is used in these kind of studies. Grounded in probability theory, statistical analysis primarily involves application of calculations to a data set for two major purposes. One is to describe the sample and second is to estimate the magnitude of associations of the sample between the variables, which will help them to make an inference consequently. Much of this is done via various kinds of statistical tools like SPSS, SAS, JMP, Stata, R, etc. In ESS, another kind of analysis has been getting popular day by day, that is the network analysis, which is more commonly conducted by the ESS researchers as a social network analysis involving the concept of network nodes connected by a series of links. However, there is a primary limitation to this network analysis study, which is its resource intensity of the data collection is required. This is because network analysis typically requires one to collect data from every node in the network, which is not cheap or neither it's easy. To cater this need, Geographical Information System or GIS and Remote Sensing or RS refers to suites of hardware, software and analytical techniques designed to collect and analyze spatial environmental data, that is, data describing in the observation of the spatial coordinates. GIS operations are primarily applied to vector-based or data-based discrete points, lines and polygons. The most popular GIS software package is ARCGIS. The term remote sensing accurately refers to remote detection of radiation that is reflected or emitted by different objects or land surfaces. This process produces image made up of cells, pixels, etc. Given the explosion of availability of spatial data, several other RS applications like ERDAS, Imagine, NV, IDRISI, etc. are also used. Another last technique that is used for these kind of analysis are the QCA approach, which is designed to compare quantitative data on a medium to small number of observations. In conclusion, we can say that these kind of SES study is one of the hallmarks of this field and it shows interdisciplinarity. This is widely accepted as a strength based on the premise that complex systems that scholars requires the application of various methods and is scientifically understood. Scholars dealing in this regard must decide, for example, how much to emphasize on the deductive versus the inductive approach, and also consider the political as well as practical implications for their hypothesis. They need to consider the scientific values, the variables they work for. A highly diverse ESS should be compatible with the systematic recording and documenting of that diversity, which is one of the goals that a rubric like this may achieve. Thank you.